Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. My name is Carmen Mezzera, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We are delighted to welcome you to the kickoff session for our week-long training for you, undergraduate and community college advisors across the United States, as part of the 2024 APSIA Forum. This event is part of a larger series of activities that we run to inspire and educate and welcome in communities that have been historically excluded from our space. And we want to help you bring the wonderful world of international affairs and policy to your students. If this is something you're well familiar with, we hope we can deepen your knowledge. If this is something that's new to you, we hope we can begin to expand and showcase all of the great things international affairs has to offer. We have two amazing alum who are going to share more about their career journeys with us today. And I also invite you to use the chat, put your questions in there as you either deepen or learn more about this space. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from some APSIA graduate students themselves as they talk about the search for graduate school and figuring out how you can best counsel your students as you go through that process with them, as well as where local and global issues connect and all of those different opportunities that these things provide. And then please plan to come back on Thursday, where we'll be showcasing the many different resources that you will now have access to because you've been a part of this training and part of the APSIA Forum Network. These sessions would not be possible without the tremendous lift of a number of people, especially my colleague, Brittany Chor, for whom I'm very grateful. Thank you, Brittany, for all of your work, as well as the many investors who enable us to deliver these programs to you. In particular, the Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs, the Robertson Foundation for Government, the Texas A&M Bush School, the University of Pittsburgh GISPIA, and the University of Southern California Master of Public Diplomacy Program, as well as many other friends who make these kinds of activities available to you and to the students and young professionals in your network for free. So thank you all for joining us. We know it's going to be a great week, and we're so glad to jumpstart and to launch right in. And so with that, I'm very pleased to be joined by Robyn Battles and Alden Hartopo, who are in very different roles, all within the broader umbrella of international affairs. And so Robyn, I'm going to start with you. Could you please just give a very quick introduction, in particular some of the highlights along your journey and how you got started as an undergraduate and found your way into your current role?
Thanks, Carmen. So as you mentioned, my name is Robyn Battles. I'm originally from Texas, born and raised Texas girl, went to school in Texas, currently working in Texas. So very proud of that. So I originally went to Texas A&M at Galveston. I always say smaller campus, much better view than the mothership and College Station. Yeah, we love Texas, absolutely. So I started there in undergrad because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and go into environmental law. It took me one law class to figure out that that was not the path for me. So I decided to pursue maritime public policy and communication, which is a bit of an odd major. It mostly focused on public policy and communication, which is where I got exposed to the world of global affairs and international affairs. And I had a professor that really took me under his wing and mentored me and really fostered that interest and gave me a lot of help and a lot of resources. And so I eventually decided to pursue a master's degree in international affairs because I knew that this was the area that I wanted to pursue a career in. So I went to the Bush School for 2 years, and I was a Robertson Foundation fellow, which helped pay for my grad school and provided me a lot of resources, which is how I ended up being connected to APSIA. So then after I graduated from there, after a couple of months of job hunting, I joined the Air Force, not as a military person, but just as a civilian. I had 2 military parents, so they were happy with that decision. I was like, this is as close as it's going to get to me joining the military, is just being as a civilian. So I started working there at the end, December of 2022. And I joined as part of the Palace Acquire program, which is very similar to the State Department's Pathways program. Some key differences: it's a 3-year, basically, educational program where they train you to do the job and then you outplace at the end of those 3 years into a permanent position. So if you'd like to learn more about that, we can sidebar later. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. Looking forward to your questions and all the conversations we're gonna have today.
Thank you so much. Alden, how about you?
Hi everyone, Alden Hartopo. I'm originally from Jakarta, Indonesia is actually where I would call home, but I went to a small liberal arts school in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's called Calvin College. I think not many people have heard of it unless you're from the Midwest or from Michigan. So very, very much came from a very small school that, I think from the perspective of international affairs, I think looking back, I will say it was a pretty small international affairs program and with a lot of limited resources. And we didn't even have academic advisors. I had my professor as my academic advisor, and he was the one telling me what to take and what to do. And that was also a unique perspective. And I think many thoughts on the pros and cons around that. But I did international affairs and economics, did a double major. And, after I graduated, I was in this weird position of trying to figure out what to do next. Ended up at a tech startup, was my first real kind of job out of college. Worked in like the business side, had no interest in international affairs. Yeah, the context was I spent a summer at an investment bank and was kind of thinking about going to corporate America. And then, decided I want to go to grad school. My professor was thrilled. He said, "Great, I'm so happy you're coming back to international relations. Stay away from Wall Street, come back to global affairs." And ended up applying to a lot of different schools and went to American University School of International Service. I was one of their dean fellows, so I was able to get a pretty great financial aid package, which is frankly the only way I was able to go to American, and why I chose it as my program. At American, I studied the International Economic Relations program. It's really this half quantitative, half qualitative program that was pretty global. There wasn't really any regional focus or anything, which I was very happy about. I wanted to kind of be able to kind of come out there into the job world looking as a generalist and not necessarily a regionalist. But I ended up being a regionalist is what ended up happening. During grad school, did the whole internships, looked for different opportunities in DC, worked at think tanks, in the private sector, ended up working at a company called McLarty Associates. They're a global strategy firm, really this kind of company that exists in DC, which I didn't know about until I moved here. That's made up of a lot of former US ambassadors, former White House officials, former cabinet secretaries that kind of come together to help large companies navigate the complexity that is geopolitical issues and international affairs. And they work with predominantly large companies, but also foundations and other also institutes of higher education as well. So, there's lots of variety in terms of the kind of clients they work with. So did that focus on Southeast Asia, given I'm originally from Indonesia, really was leveraging what my existing background. And I wrote a couple papers here and there in college around that, but again, never was a regionalist, ended up in it. By honestly, I think just that's sometimes how your career journey works, is you just find yourself on a path and you just go with it. So did that for a few years. A great opportunity popped up. Google was a longtime client. Google had a great maternity leave policy. They have a wonderful maternity leave policy, which allowed folks to go on about 6 months of leave, which also meant they needed a backfill for that role. So they came to our firm looking for some additional support, and I was able to be seconded over for about 9 months, working embedded in their team and their international government affairs team, working on kind of advocacy around the DC foreign policy community, the embassies, the State Department, the different think tanks, and kind of advocating and looking for partnerships around Google's issues. And then I used that position to look for a full-time role, which is what I'm currently in, which is I'm the chief of staff for the vice president of the K9 product, which is the team that focuses on policy issues and government affairs around Google's core products, search, ads, maps, news, now Gemini, and really have enjoyed taking a different approach, looking at the different approach of not necessarily just foreign policy, not a regional issue, but really a global issue, a tech policy issue, but at a company that works, very closely with a lot of the big issues happening right now. Elections, for instance, and a lot of the conflicts all relate, all have some tie, surprisingly, to Google products because, as everyone uses Google for information. And I think because of that, we also find ourselves in the middle of a lot of geopolitical issues as well. So that's a little bit about me. Happy to talk about those experiences, but also about my time in undergraduate education and working with my academic advisors to figure out what was the best next step for me.
Actually, Alden, to build on that, can you talk about some things you did while you were an undergrad that you're glad you did, and some things you wish you had done? And if we promise not to tell, some things you wish you hadn't done while you were an undergrad?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing for me was get involved, be involved. The best decision I made was to join the student newspaper. I started as a staff writer my freshman year, and by the time I was a senior year, I joined the leadership team. And that, I think, writing is by far probably one of the more important skill sets I've had throughout my career. I've always been tested on writing in some way. There's been some sort of assessment. They want to see how you're able to write. Are you able to be concise? Are you able to write a certain way? And I think being in the student newspaper has really taught me the ability to write well. But also it teaches you a lot of great kind of education, post-college job skills. For example, working under a deadline, working under pressure. You stay up late on a certain time of the week trying to meet your deadline for print. And that was definitely, I would say, the best thing I've done. I think the other thing that I wish I did, I wouldn't say, I don't think I had a ton of regrets. I think I wish I did student government. I think that would have been interesting. But the way it was for me is when you're in a student newspaper, you can't also be in a student government. You got to pick one, right? If you're in the press, you're reporting on a student government. So I picked that route. But I think, there would have been a lot of different skill sets to have gotten from student government, especially to use those skills to, a lot of it is negotiations, working together, kind of look for compromise, running programs, building programs. They're all things that are incredibly important for a lot of these entry-level jobs in international affairs. So that's kind of just two buckets for me.
That's great. Robyn, how about you? Things you're glad you did, things you wish you had done?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really glad that I did was to pursue opportunities even outside of what my school offered. So that I had an opportunity to, my school being kind of small, even though it is tied to the big name Texas A&M, there was only 2,500 students, and that included grad students and doctorate degree students on our campus. So the campus itself was pretty small, and so we didn't have any foreign language classes. And I knew that a lot of grad programs, and if I wanted to work in global affairs, international affairs, having a foreign language skill was going to be a huge asset, and if not a requirement in a lot of ways. So I had to pursue study abroads and self-study. So I'm glad that I kind of had that that knowledge and that forethought, because in order to graduate from my grad school 2 years later, I had to pass an OPI. And so not having a native language and not having any formal education, I had to utilize study abroads that weren't even necessarily connected by the school. It was just, oh, I found this organization. They have a Arabic program in Morocco. I'm going to go for a summer. And a lot of that was just me taking the initiative to find those opportunities. So I'm really glad that I did that, because it helped me out way later on. Something that I wish I had did before that, gosh, I'm kind of like Alden. I don't have a lot of regrets. I did get involved in student government. I probably could have diversified the things because I kind of found my interest and found my niche and kind of stuck with it. But I think having diversity in terms of the different things that you have and that you've pursued can give you different perspectives, can get you different types of skills, because one grad school or one job might be looking for one thing, but then another job and another grad school might be looking for something else. So I think the more diversity and the more multifacetedness that you can give yourself ahead of time might help you out later down the road, because you never know which one of those things are going to pay off. So like I said, I kind of found my niche and I kind of stuck with it. And I think I should have taken more opportunities to sort of broaden my horizons a little bit, but nothing detrimental, thankfully.
I just want a quick +1 on that. Absolutely agree. I think I do have 2 regrets, and I just remembered it when Robyn started talking about study abroad, which one is, yeah, outside of campus opportunities. I worked on campus. I did research on campus. I did, the tutor. I did all these different great jobs, did newspaper, clubs, but I had no actual like working in a nonprofit, working in a think tank, anything outside of campus. And that was my biggest regret is that, when you leave the job market, when you leave for the job market, you're going to be encountering all these students who have interned at XYZ. I think when I first started at American University as a grad student, I was a TA, and there were these sophomores. And again, these are students at a great international fair school in DC, have a ton of resources, a lot of networks, a lot of great alumni base. They were interning at, the Commerce Department, the State Department, and they were sophomores and juniors. And I was coming and being, wow, like I have none of that. I have no relevant experiences. And I was a first-year graduate student, realizing that I would have to compete against these undergrads for jobs. And I think one thing I really want to emphasize is, encourage students to look for opportunities remote, even if I know unpaid, paid is a whole thing. Even if they can get 10 hours, that's better than like nothing, right? Even if it's a 5 to 10 hour part-time thing, that would be great. A remote unpaid internship while they're in school would be wonderful. I think that way to really go back to what Robyn was saying, diversify your resume. You want to be able to not just have on-campus jobs. And the second thing is if your school is fortunate to have this, a semester in DC, encourage students to take advantage of it. I did it. We did have one, but I also understand there are programs that help students apply for these types of semesters that are not necessarily linked to the school. So would encourage a semester in DC. I think that's the best exposure someone can get as a junior, as a rising junior, rising senior, to work in DC, to meet people in foreign policy, and to get the chance to network at a very early age.
Thank you both so much. And I put the link in for APSIA's job board that has remote internships and all kinds of opportunities. We've also got a regular series of webinars, and folks can find the recordings with some of those groups like Alden mentioned, that the CAPALs and the CBCFs and the CHCIs and all of those acronyms that I will translate for you on Thursday if you come, to hear about the many different ways that students can access DC-based internships or internships around the world. And if you'd like to catch up on those recordings, I just put our YouTube channel link in the chat as well. Robyn, we had one clarifying question. You mentioned you needed foreign language skills to pass your OPI. What's an OPI?
Oh, great question. So the OPI is an oral proficiency interview. It's one of the more commonly recognized ways of assessing your language capability. The thing that makes the OPI, the oral proficiency interview, unique is that it's an interview, so it's a phone call. My school had a testing room, like on the day I scheduled it. I went in on that day. I went into this room. I got a phone call. It was like something out of a movie. You just have a phone randomly call. And then you pick it up and they give you the instructions. You're speaking with a native speaker on the other end. So they give you the instructions, give you the general layout of how the phone call is going to work. They give it to you in your primary language in English, and then they repeat the instructions in your language that you're testing in. And then off, it's like, okay, ready, set, go, start conversing. And so they start out at a pretty basic level, basic introductions, asking you questions about yourself. And then their job is to test your language ability. So they might move up to an intermediate or move up to an advanced level, start using harder vocabulary words or more complex sentences, and start asking you things in present tense, past tense, future tense, just to see where you score. So it's not a pass or fail test, which is a little bit of a relief, but they kind of score you on, you're either, I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's like a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And then like within that, there's separate categories. And for my school, in order to graduate, you needed, I think it was like a basic intermediate or somewhere in the intermediate range. Anything below that, you'd have to retest. Anything above that, just brownie points that you can add to your resume. So there's a bunch of other language assessments. There's no reading in that one, and there's no writing. So they didn't particularly care about that, just as long as you can converse.
That's great. Thank you. And can you build on that a little bit? Do you use your language skills in your everyday work? And broadly, what is your everyday work as a foreign affairs specialist for the Air Force?
Yeah, I did all that hard work and I don't use it at all. Everyone that I work with are English speakers. Although when I do outplace, I will be working directly with country. And they typically also speak English. That's just the common language that everyone uses. However, I think that if I do end up getting assigned to a country that does speak Arabic, that might be a nice area where I can sort of bridge that cultural gap and build stronger connections. So I do look forward to being able to use it. And I still, every day I engage in some form of practice that I keep the skill up, because I'm sure many of you know that if you don't use your language skills, it's very easy to lose it. So I still try to keep that up as much as I possibly can and look for opportunities to still speak it. So my current job, so I work with the Air Force Security Assistant Training. What they do is they train international military students. So whenever a foreign country, one of our partners, one of our allies would like training, and training could be medical, it could be professional military education on leadership skills, it could be training you on F-16s, it could be quite the spectrum. It could be English language training, whatever you can think of, they probably train on it. And so whenever those countries would like training and they'd like to be trained by what we call blue suiters, which are just our airmen, that has to be coordinated. All the logistics, all the payments, all of the travel, all of those things has to be handled by somebody, and that somebody is the organization that I work for. So like I mentioned, I came into this organization through the Palace Acquire program, which is similar to the Pathways. It's just your entryway into federal service. And I'm in my second year, about halfway through. So I'm working, I rotate through a bunch of the different offices to get a full picture of what each of the sections do. So right now I'm working in the contracting area. So if the United States Air Force can't meet the country's need, then they can pursue a contract option, which incorporates our private industry partners to meet some of those training requirements as well. So the end state is to become a country manager, and that's working one-on-one directly with either one country or a set of countries. And that's where it really depends on mission need, where I'll end up being placed. But my hope is to be placed somewhere in the CENTCOM area, just because that's where my passion lies. And I'd like to use my OPI score. I'd like to use some of that training, 6 months in Morocco. I'm like, come on. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Alden, I'm curious, we all think we know Google, but what kinds of skills, you talked a little bit about writing and teamwork and those kinds of pieces, what kind of skills help people succeed there? And what kinds of roles in general would folks interested in international affairs find at a place like Google?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, Google's involved. I think as a company, our products are used by, billions of people. And because of that, we have to ensure that we have policies in place that are protecting our user, but also are allowing for innovation, right? So, I think, where it ties into foreign policy is in a couple areas, right? Foreign policy, first of all, international affairs is, very, very broad term, right? Where Google kind of like people have looked at Google is things like cybersecurity, right? I think that's very much a hot area, and so is AI, right? Everyone's been thinking about AI and this and AI and that, and I think looking even broader, you're looking at like geopolitical competition, right? Like tech competition is a big thing between the United States and China. These are all big issues that I think if you're working on Asia, if you're working on technology policy, you're thinking about, and these kind of skill sets are going to be really important if you're thinking about a job at Google, because they do hire for people who have expertise in competition between the US and China, for instance. They look for people who have a background in a geopolitical issue. For the team I used to work on, there was essentially a regional expert based in DC, right? The team called International Government Affairs had an Asia Pacific lead, had a Europe lead, international organizations lead, because we do a lot of work on the multilateral level. And these folks typically came from your classic international affairs backgrounds, right? But we also have people that work on cybersecurity. And I think that's a big thing too, is, different parts of Google that focus on understanding the different threats that come from, foreign players. And a lot of the times you have to understand the geopolitical nature behind that, right? So it really ties into, I think, on one hand, security, but the other hand, just generally understand the region is going to be really important, right? But I think the other area is just broadly, not just Google, but I think in the world of international government affairs, I want to take a step back really is there's a lot of people that are applying their understanding of how the government works, understanding how the department works, but understanding how to create relationships with different foreign policy stakeholders in DC. So like I mentioned, a lot of what we do is also partnering with embassies, partnering with think tanks and thinking and that are foreign policy focused and looking for ways that we can bring in their interests and our interests and kind of create some programs or events or roundtables that can help educate different folks coming in, but also to help, create a forum for conversation. So really, I think to succeed is hard to say because everyone's jobs are so different, but it really comes down to just, I would think a general understanding of how the world works. And that's why, and that's where you basically get with an international affairs degree, right? is you kind of understand the relationship that multilateral institutions have in foreign policy decision making. You understand, what a trade agreement is, all these different things have an impact on the business community. So I think I just want to add, generally a lot of what I've done has been focused on government affairs, intersection of business and policy. My last job was a company called McLarty Associates. And I just want to really speak on that because that intersection of business policy is an area that not a lot of people are familiar with. I think people come to DC thinking, like, for example, I came to DC thinking all I could do was be a diplomat, right? Or maybe be a researcher. I didn't realize there are jobs that are understanding the role that the private sector plays in international affairs. So Google's one example, but I think broadly speaking, when I was at McLarty, I worked with people who had a strong understanding of the U.S. kind of Asia relationship, right? U.S. Asia Pacific, U.S. Southeast Asia, U.S. Indonesia, U.S. China. And a lot of companies are curious to understand, like, what kind of risk am I facing by doing business in these markets, right? And these kind of consultancies exist to provide a geopolitical analysis to corporate America. So I always joke, look, if you like international affairs, and you're okay with the private sector and you want to get paid well, this is a great place to go. It's really just having these opportunities out there that you might not know existed. Again, that intersection is very unique, and they are looking for people who understand how the world works, who understand how the U.S. makes decisions and, looks at its foreign policy.
Robyn, does that resonate with you in the public sector?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it does. Ours is definitely on a micro level because it's really the relationships that you build, because oftentimes you're speaking with the security cooperation officer that is in country. They're usually a uniformed military member that is working on behalf, like working in an embassy on behalf of working with the US government and whatever government in whatever country that they're in. And so really understanding the cultural relationships, understanding the economic factors, understanding the history, and how things get done, not just here within the United States, but in other countries. They have different governments. There's one person, that'll really give you the right answer. So it's knowing who that person is, or sometimes you have to deal with a really bloated bureaucracy. And so knowing, hey, how do you navigate their system and how does that compare to our system, and to make these things work is really important. And then understanding, hey, there's a conflict going on in X region. How is that going to affect us, or how might that change training requirements? So yeah, having that broader understanding is critical to what we do. And it's interesting to see it play out from the inside out.
That's great. Thank you. Friends, I have two more questions, and then I do invite our advisors, put those questions in the chat. Now's a great time to pick the brains of our alumni, things that you're curious about, questions you get from your students. They're a wonderful wealth of resources. We talked about some of the things you wish you had done and glad you did. Were there times when things didn't go the way you wanted, and maybe a failure you had to overcome, or ways of thinking you had to unlearn or work around as you navigated these different spaces? Robyn, you're on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, I probably have more examples of things not going according to plan than I do examples of them going according to plan. I can think about how I wanted to be a CLS, critical language scholar, and that was just, I had it in my head somehow, like this was it. This was the thing that I really wanted to do, and it's a fantastic program. So if anyone has the opportunity to do that, obviously take advantage of that. But I got rejected from that, but it led me to end working for Indo-Pacific Command. And I got to do some research for them, which was a huge asset to my job now. Like having that on my resume led to me getting this job now, or at least some part of it. I can think about internship opportunities, like what is it called? The Public Policy Internship Partnership. I forget what program. That's a internship program that Texas A&M has, and it allows you to spend a summer in DC working with a bunch of different agencies. And I got rejected from that. I had to apply about 2-3 times before I got accepted. But it led me to, it lined up perfectly. Like there's so many opportunities and people that I met from being in that specific cohort. Getting rejected from certain language programs. Like there's just so many areas, and I don't even necessarily see them as like failures per se, but just doors closing that led me to the right door that I was supposed to go into. So, it's really all a matter of perspective. Maybe I just say that because, you got to justify so many rejections at some point. And then even trying to find a job, like I always joke that it changed my brain chemistry, because I thought like, okay, like I have all these skills and I have this degree. So like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be hired. I'm ready to get in and change the world. Right. And then the application process is humbling, to say the least. But I got a lot of resiliency out of that and a lot of patience out of that. And I really feel like I ended up right where I was meant to be. So I could go on. We could probably spend a whole hour talking about my rejection stories. But it really does make you better. And so if you ever have students that are going through that and they just feel really disheartened, there's nothing that's really going to take away the sting of rejection, but just letting them know it does get better. And resiliency is what's going to pay off. Patience is what's going to pay off. And, to trust that they did what they could and that their skills are going to get them to where they need to be. And if not, there's plenty of opportunities. So cast a wide net and you'll find what's right for you.
I love that. Now you all have it on tape, so you can just play this for your students when they're sad and disheartened. Alden, how about you?
I definitely want to focus on the unlearned component. And there's one thing, that I'm sure the one word everyone's familiar with in international affairs is networking, right? It's DC. It's just how things work here. It's just, you just got to play the game, unfortunately. But, networking isn't something that people are comfortable with, right? Networking, the idea, that you're asking someone to help you, and maybe people see it as transactional. People might see it as, maybe like for me, it was really just like a cultural thing. Like I'm not comfortable like asking. When I was in college, I was like, I'm not gonna, ask people to get a job, or I'm not gonna like. It just feels wrong, right? I think it's and then these are things that I've heard from many undergraduates, like from around the country and around the world too. Is that look, like networking is an icky thing. Like I feel gross having to go out and like kind of like pitch myself and get folks to like be interested in me and hopefully, then ask for a job. It's very, very transactional and it's hard to unlearn, and I think, even when I was undergrad, I was like cold emailing people on LinkedIn, cold emailing alumni, cold emailing, all these different folks. These are things I wasn't comfortable with. I was like, I'm just a nobody. Like, no one really cares about me. Like I don't have the backgrounds of these interesting people that they're probably reaching out to these people. But the thing is, like, you have to leverage everything you got. I think the hustle mentality is key here. And really with what Robyn said is like, look, even if you're getting rejected, keep hustling, keep looking for the next opportunity. You don't let that stop you. And the same goes for when you're networking, right? I think I remember, after I graduated, I was in a position, I said I had a temp job, but there was a period of 7 months where I was unemployed, right? And like, frankly, like I got there after being employed for a very long time and just trying to figure out my next steps. I had various barriers. I was an international student at that time. I had a lot more different types of challenges, but it was hard. Rejection sucked. And during those 7 months, I just spent my time jumping on phone calls. Like Zoom wasn't a thing. So it's like phone calls. And that, practice was what really gave me the confidence, was really helped me give me the experience of how to do it. And that actually prepared me for DC. I didn't even know networking was a word until I got to DC, but just that cold emailing, cold messaging on LinkedIn and getting people to be like, hey, like, can you talk to me for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes? Would love your advice. And look, like, I probably messaged 100 people, 50 people got back to me, and only 10 people want to do a call. And it's a numbers game, but you got to do it. And I would really encourage everyone to just have, encourage your students to hustle and to have that mentality of like, keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. Because sometimes, I have met people who just think that, okay, eventually it'll work out, but there needs to be some sort of hustle mentality that you can definitely have for your students, and like give them the resources. These are templates you can fill out to alumni. Here's the one great thing that I think the academic advisor I had at American University had was that he kept a great relationship with the alumni. He would reach out, ask alumni to come back and do panels and built this really great network with his alumni, with the alumni at SIS at American, and was able to use that to help the students, right? And I think, as academic advisors, you can really go out there and like look for the alumni, because you never know. I went to a very small school, and I was very surprised to find some really interesting alumni in DC from that small school in Grand Rapids that are doing some interesting work, right? You never know who you might find, and they're more than willing to help. They just think the school's forgotten them, right? I've met people who are like, oh yeah, I went to a small school, they forgot about me, they don't know I exist. But they're always more than happy to help, and it's all about tracking them down, creating that list, building that relationship, having them come back, and then using that to help your students, right? Or giving them the resources to go out there and cold email. So I learned that the hard way, which was just doing it myself. But I really wish I had those templates I could use to this email, or just send a note on LinkedIn to folks, right? And that's what I'll say is like really, learn that hustle mentality, but also learn to network. And I think, I had to unlearn that, but it worked out for me, really helped me down the line. There are numerous instances where I met someone at a happy hour and I was able to stay in touch with them that was able to help me out. And I always tell this to everyone I talk to. Look, if you're not doing networking, someone else is, and unfortunately, they're going to be a little bit ahead of you. So you really got to, unfortunately, it's DC. I always say you got to play the game. It's not that hard. Practice makes perfect.
Again, advisors, I'm sure you give a similar speech to your students, but now you can say, I heard it here. Networking is key and important and not as scary as it can feel sometimes. And it all comes down to that same skill that was mentioned earlier about relationship management. It doesn't have to be extractive or solely about a job. It can really be about building some of those deeper ties, particularly when it is a warmer relationship or an open door, like with an alum or a faculty member. So again, folks, I invite you, if you have questions, put them in the chat now. We're going to turn to you in just a quick second. But I did want to pick up on one thing. A lot of the questions that students often have are about the financial security and stability that comes from jobs in international affairs. And so I'm curious for each of you, not what your salary is, but how you found that sustainability component in the public sector and in the private sector as you've gone from graduate school into professional life. And Alden, since you're laughing, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll turn it over to Robyn.
I always say the most recession-proof job is the U.S. government. So, I mean, it's true, especially of having seen the last few years in the private sector. And look, like, for the most part, I think, especially if you're in a think tank space, you're not going to go through, I think corporate America is a very unique world, right? And I think you've read the headlines, you've seen tech layoffs and all of that. And stability is not always there. I've realized that. And it's a bit different when you're in a smaller company or if you're in the think tank world, which is entirely different. But I think, for the most part, there is a lot of growth opportunities. And I think for the most part, you're not going to have really, a lot of issues with in terms of instability in your job, right? I mean, but I would really say, like, truly, government jobs are great. You learn a ton, and truly, they're stable, right? And I think I will say private jobs are very risky. I can no longer, say it's the most safest job, having seen what I've seen in the last few years. Unfortunately, it's a great place to be, but I've seen a lot, and it's not pretty.
That was not how I thought that was going to go. Robyn, how about you? No, I'm teasing.
Yeah, I definitely have to mirror some of Alden's observations, especially working for the Department of Defense. There's always funding. The problem, though, is that if you choose to work for a federal organization or federal agency, is that, especially in certain fields or certain organizations, a lot of that money is tied up in political debates. that happen on the national scale. So sometimes, yes, it's pretty stable, but if there's furloughs, or if there's continuing resolutions or stops in the budget, they won't pass the budget according to the timeline. And so now everything is kind of at a standstill. So it's a very real possibility that if you go into the federal government, that you might be furloughed. My dad was in the civil service for a really long time, and I remember multiple times where he would just be home for weeks, which was great. But and now, sort of being an adult myself and being in that, I'm like, man, okay, so you gotta make sure you plan out your financials so that you're not really out of pocket or in a potentially bad situation. The good thing is that a lot of banks and a lot of companies, they understand the struggles of being a federal worker, so you can get a lot of discounts whenever the government shuts down. They have a lot of loan pauses and forgiveness for that types of things, so that might be some future resources to plug in. So overall, it is very stable. It's very hard to fire a federal employee. Well, not hard, but it's a lengthy process and it's not easy. So as far as job stability and job security, you know that tomorrow when you go to work, you're going to have a job barring something catastrophic happening. And if there is a government shutdown and you have to be furloughed, you will be back paid. That's a law now. So there is stability in that too. So every now and then it gets a little shaky because you don't know where your funding is going to come from. And then so that's just something to keep in mind. But on the salary that I have in the city that I have, in that city that I'm in, I feel comfortable. I'm not living lavishly, you know, but I can take care of my needs. I feel like I'm earning a decent amount, no huge complaints about that. And with the federal service, they do look at the cost of living. So I could be in the same job that I am here, but let's say I was living in DC where the cost of living is higher, then my pay would be commensurate with the increased cost of living. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're on USA Jobs or wherever else and looking at that, and you're like, man, that's kind of a low salary, just know that there are certain bonuses, and usually they give you a raise to keep up with inflation. So they're pretty good about doing that, because I'm sure a lot of private sector companies, they might not take that into consideration. So some perks there.
Thank you. That's also a great point that your job and so many other opportunities are not in DC, in international affairs and across the spectrum. And that's something we're definitely going to get into tomorrow as well in our session on local global. But so many even public sector jobs are beyond the Beltway, and lots of opportunities for students wherever they are or want to be.
Yeah.
So thanks. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat, either directly to me or publicly to everybody. To start off, to our speakers, James asks, it's said that inclusion of underrepresented groups in careers in international affairs is still behind in terms of diversity. What do you think can be done better by those of us in higher education? And what did your institutions do to attract you to international affairs? Robyn, again, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Because I definitely see that, but I think the good thing about it, there's good news and bad news. I think the good news is that it's not anything systematic or intentional within the system that is barring people from underrepresented communities. Coming from an underrepresented community, I've never felt any type of discrimination or type of like someone blocking me or stopping me from pursuing those opportunities. So they're definitely there. They're definitely open. They're definitely welcoming. There's huge pushes now for diversity, not just of like your typical race and gender and age, but different backgrounds, different perspectives. So it's definitely something that these organizations are pushing for. I think what is the barrier and what causes that underrepresentation is knowledge and telling people, hey, this is a thing. Because I had no idea that this was even a career field or even something that you could do. And to be honest, a lot of people that are former military or have been in the civil service for a long time, they didn't even realize that this is something that you could do. So I think more than anything, it's just a lack of knowledge, because if you're not already in those bubbles where you would be exposed to it to begin with, it's not even going to be on your radar. So I think that what attracted me to it was just it being presented to me that this is a thing that you could do. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. So I think that's something that higher education institutions could do, is just to spread awareness and to make something that seems like this huge monstrous undertaking of maybe working across the world, make it a little bit more digestible and approachable, that like, hey, I know it sounds really big, crazy, and scary, but actually it's really not that bad. It's actually pretty doable work that can make a pretty big impact.
And we are 1000% here, advisors, to make that particular storytelling easier. Alden, how about you?
Yeah, really the knowledge component is incredibly, incredibly important. You know, like I said, I didn't know, I didn't have the resources I needed in undergraduate years to know what I can do with an international affairs degree. And, you know, I didn't even know fellowships. You know, I think there's a ton of great fellowships they're doing for underrepresented folks to work in government, to kind of look for a career in DC. And I think more attention needs to be paid to that. I think just generally fellowships are a great thing, right? And I certainly was never told about fellowships at all during my time. And you know, I would came to DC, and I had plenty of friends who were in all sorts of really interesting fellowships. And I really wish I knew more about that. But also, you know, like I talked about leveraging the alumni, the alumni, right? Like having folks come and speak on panels in your classrooms to your students, to do your international affairs clubs, international affairs offices, having them kind of coordinate something. But also think about local resources. You know, I think one thing I've learned is there's something called a World Affairs Council, and they exist in all parts of the country, and they bring in fascinating speakers, right? I think looking for ways to get plugged in there would be a great thing. You know, there's one that existed in West Michigan, but I never knew about it until I saw someone go speak there years later. And maybe they weren't actually as big as they were now. But there's tons of great local resources that are plugged into the international field, right? So again, just looking to educate, to provide knowledge, I think is really important, and let them know. You know, I think looking for those resources online, working with APSIA to kind of get those resources, and in turn, you know, provide that in a document or some sort of web in your websites to students is incredibly important. And I think, you know, the last component I'll say is, you know, I don't want to sound like the biggest advocate for government, but government pays really well. I mean, they do. And there's great jobs in government that you can do. And contrary to popular belief, there are great jobs, right? And I think, you know, I'm just this big government push right now, but look, like I know I didn't want to scare people off in the private sector. I think, you know, there's economic times have made it difficult, but there are also tons of interesting careers you can have in international affairs, broadly speaking, that can provide, you know, I think competitive salaries with, you know, for folks that are looking for that. Right. If that's something you're interested in, if your students are interested in that, there are plenty of jobs out there in DC that you don't know about. Again, there's more jobs around the country. There's tons of these smaller kind of councils or local chambers of commerce that might have international components. But in DC, there's so many opportunities that you can have in fields you might not have been aware of. Like I didn't even know the company I used to work for existed till I moved to DC. And more I'm finding people saying that, wow, this niche I thought that I could never find actually exists. And I think it's all about looking for it. It's about leveraging LinkedIn, you know, typing in those keywords and finding people that work there. But also, you know, as advisors, invite people that aren't alumni, invite people that are that might be interested, or that maybe that in the APSIA network, right? And you can kind of bring them in to kind of speak to these different folks. So I think this really just, you know, again, building that knowledge base database for students is really helpful.
Yeah, and can I put something that you said, Alden, about you know, really explaining what international affairs is and how broad it truly is? Because you might be really interested in international affairs, but maybe you're not sold on government. Maybe you don't have the passion like Alden and I do about working for the government, but you can be a governmental contractor. You can basically every agency, every in private companies, there's so many aspects that have an international affairs component, because we're such a globally connected society. Like it's hard to be work in this modern world and not be globally connected in some way. And because of that, you're going to have to manage those relationships. And that's essentially what international affairs is all about. So if you're into sciences, you know, they're going to have an international affairs component. If you're into law enforcement, even the FBI, your local police station, anything in between those two, in where in that range, they're going to have an international affairs component if you're interested in health. So you can basically take your students' niche and interest and find an international component, or do the reverse. If they want to do something global and something in this field, but they're not exactly sure what, it's like, okay, well, what other interests do you have? Is it arts? Is it humanitarian? Is it sciences? Is it data? Whatever it is, you can pretty much find an IA component. And that's the beautiful thing about it. You don't have to just be an ambassador or a congressperson or work on the Hill, or if that's what you want to do, perfect, they got plenty of jobs for that. But if that's not what you want to do, there's a lot of options out there. So I think that might encourage some students who are maybe weary about fully pursuing it or fully studying it because they don't want to pigeonhole themselves and they don't want to be a diplomat. Like, that's okay, you don't have to. There's so many other things that you can do, private or public sector.
I love it. Not only for all of these great ideas, but also what a wonderful way to start our week, because we're going to be talking about all of those different pieces and also the ways that we can help make part of that conversation a little easier on all of you too, especially those who may be newer to this space. And I put these in the chat, but just in case folks miss them, if you want to begin that journey with your students, we have an online career guide that has a whole section on the intersections of science and technology and IA, or business or trade or education, and all of those components, as well as a printable handout that you can give to your students or have for your own tools and resources. So we are at the beginning of a wonderful conversation, thanks to Alden and Robyn, to think about how you can make it a little smoother and more broadening for your students. I have one last quick question someone sent to me directly, and then I wanted to wrap up to respect everybody's time. But one question someone had was, you all have talked about writing and relationship building, language skills, time abroad, professional experience, all of these pieces. And some of that is on the students, but are there good ways that advisors can support the development of these areas among their students, particularly if resources are not infinite and they have to think about how they deploy the time and the money that they have? Alden, since you mentioned so many of these different pieces, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think, one immediate thought I have, thinking about ways you can build skill sets is, well, there's two things I'm thinking about. One is just, there's a plethora of free online courses out there, and a lot of them have areas that might be of interest to your students, right? I think leveraging the internet I think is great. Or when do a Google search, it's going to be very, very helpful. But two, a lot of think tanks and all these organizations in DC, all their events are free. A lot of them are online. If someone wants to get skill sets to start thinking about how policy memos are written, a lot of these think tanks put out memos, put out different styles of writing. And I think I would encourage, academic advisors to start having their students look at think tanks, look at publications they're putting out, right? And sometimes, you don't realize this, but there's just so much free resources that are out there that these companies or these organizations are putting out. And sometimes they might even have kind of toolkits, right? You never know. I think a lot of different nonprofits and think tanks and research centers might have toolkits that might be beneficial for students. There's a lot of resources they have for academia out there, right? Also, at the same time, also look at other academic institutions, see what they have, right? I mean, sometimes these bigger schools might be putting their things out for free on their website. Look for ways to be inspired and take that and apply it for what's best for your students. So in a world of limited resources in your current budgets or your current offices, there's, again, leverage what's out there already, leverage what you can take from other places and kind of replicate in a way that's best for your students, and direct students to these think tanks to watch the live panels. I mean, there's a lot of great things to do without having to be in DC. Everything is online, there's Zoom, everything is virtual, which is a great way for students to kind of get that learning outside the classroom at an early age and not have to be in DC, right? So just read and just watch, and I think you'll learn a lot. And they're all on YouTube. A ton of this is on YouTube. Not that I'm pitching another Google product, but a ton of these videos are on YouTube, right? For think tanks for that.
Your check is in the mail, Alden, from your bosses. Alvin, how about you? Any great ideas?
Yeah, so I can think of 3 key skills that I have noticed that are huge assets to my organization. And if you think about it, to pretty much any organization, so even if your student decides this is not the career field that they want to go into, it's still, these 3 things will still be beneficial to them. One is your communication skills. Being able to write and speak clearly will set you so far above your peers, it's unbelievable. Just be whenever you have to speak in front of your leadership and you need to brief complex ideas, but you can do it in a concise and articulate way. And you're not up there nervous and shaking and saying ums a bunch of times. Being able to get those skills is a huge asset. And the way that you get that isn't always some fancy online class that you have to take or pay a bunch of money for. It's just practice. So if you have a student and they're like, hey, I need to get up my communication skills, practice and work with them on writing emails and explaining things in written form and explaining things in visual form. So many of my coworkers unfortunately don't know good data visualization skills. So even just having a basic knowledge of when to use a pie chart and when to use a column chart can really set them above and help them out later on in their careers. So some of those hard skills, or just the communication, whether it's verbal, written, or visualization skills, are super important. So that would be the first one. The second one, kind of free, is your hard skills. So if you are good at data analytics, or if there's a program that you're really good at, go ahead and like find some type of software or hardware that you can really master. And whether it's, sorry to say this, Microsoft, DoD loves to use Microsoft. So using Excel or Sheets or Word or Docs or whatever it is that you use, becoming really proficient at some of these programs is also really going to help you out later down the road, because those are just little things that really do have a big impact later on. And then, yeah, so I think the networking aspect is a big part of it. And that kind of leads into the communication of it, right? Because if you don't know how to sell yourself in a humble way, but to really advocate for yourself, so whether that's like resume writing or interview skills, these are all just ways that you can interact one-on-one with your students to help get their skills up, because these are just the common skills that you need to operate and to thrive in these types of environments. And so even though, yeah, you may not be able to go on a study abroad to study a foreign language or be able to take an internship because it's unpaid, a lot of the skills that you get out of those experiences, you can still foster in your environment with the resources that you have. Because yeah, you could have done this amazing internship with the State Department in Mongolia, but if you can't write effectively, you can't communicate your ideas, you can't absorb information, you're not proficient at basic computer skills, that experience doesn't do much for you. But if you can come in and say, hey, having a willingness to learn, I'm open, I can obtain a lot of information. That was my strategy. I was like, hey, I might not have a lot of professional work experience, but I've been a student for 80% of my life. I can retain a lot of information. You can give me a lot of information at me through a fire hose, and I'll be able to retain it and be able to utilize that later. So again, perspective. But these are just little things and ways that you can help get these skills for your students up, so that they don't feel like they're lagging behind just because they don't have resources. Because at the end of the day, it's your skills, not necessarily having this big flashy internship that is really going to get you to where you want to be.
I love that. And I love that reframing, because students so often think that all of that time doesn't count towards their professional development. Well, I want to thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom with us over the last hour. And thank you to all of our advisors. We have a really brief poll to let us know how we did. And I want to remind everybody to please come on back tomorrow. We have 2 great sessions, one on very much that local and global opportunity piece, as well as the chance to hear from some current students about their own choices and pathways into graduate school, if that's something that you think your students are going to have as a stop on their journey. And then on Thursday, we're going to be really unpacking all of these different great resources including our remote internship that comes with a stipend. So please do come on back for that. And we look forward to seeing you throughout the whole week. Thank you again to all of our investors. Thank you to all of our advisors. And thank you most especially to Alden and Robyn for sharing your great expertise with us. We really look forward to further connecting with you and to connecting with our advisors going forward. So folks, please don't forget to do that poll. It's just a couple simple questions, a little button clicking. Great way to end a day. And we'll go from there.